Ballpark Nation presents
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here come the Astros, burning.
First pitch. And Alex lines it to the left center field. That's the base hit. Pitcher around third is coming home. Easier up with the baseball. The throw it up late. Not in time. Astros win. Astros win.
One every time. Alvarez hits a high drive center field. Veerling's back. This game is turned upside down.
And the pitch is lifted to right by Castellanos. Long run for Tucker over toward the line and foul territory. Makes the catch, and the Houston Astros do it again. 2022 World Series champions.
Welcome to Go Astros, your look at the two-time World Series champions from three guys who have been here since Art Howe had hair.
Here come the Astros, breathing orange fire. Here come the Astros.
Good morning and welcome to
How about that? Huh?
I like it. Welcome to the three-man tag team of Astros podcasts. I like making references that Jim doesn't like because he doesn't ever watch wrestling. But we're not the Fabulous Freebirds, but we are Andy Tom Chesson, James Christopher, and Brian Bam Bam Arbor.
I think we all like art for wrestling. For us is Mid-South Wrestling with Paul Bosch doing IW Marks ads, which I used to watch, like 11:30 on Saturday night, in this like 13-inch TV in my bedroom.
Coming to you live from Channel 39 at the Sam Houston Coliseum. Absolutely. That's where Mattress Mac, famous Astros fan, got his start, if we're going to bring it back to our actual topic of our show. We are here on February 5th to talk to you a little bit about the pre-spring training Astros, because in, 9 scant days, the Astros pitchers and catchers will report. There's a little bit of action on the Astros front this week. The Astros traded to the Los Angeles Angels for Trey Cabbage. Trey Cabbage is a first baseman outfielder, plus speed, pretty good defender.
Who will not cost us a lot of cabbage.
And has a lot of power, more so than most cabbage does. And has good power. Big problem is he can't hit the ball a lot all the time consistently. Strikes out, doesn't make contact. We'll start with Jim. Is this a guy that's making the roster? Is this a positive ad? They put him on the 40 immediately. I guess they had to based on the way they picked him up.
I think he makes the roster because I think he is offensively the same player as John Singleton with more positional diversity. And I think the Astros have always put primer on that. But I also feel like he's also, I know he's 26, which is old in baseball years, but he's also only 26. And he did come off a 30-30 season in AAA. Now, Andy and I, we cover minor league baseball on our other show, and we know the PCL is an offensive league, but I still think there's some upside there. And this feels like one of those trades that could work out for the Astros, like we've seen so many in the past. So, yeah, I think he makes the roster.
Brian, what's your take on Cabbage?
Yeah, I had noted this. The Angels had DFA'd him last week, and the Astros apparently thought other teams were going to claim him, and most teams are ahead of the Astros. So that's why they made the minor trade to get him. Hey, we will give you something, even if it's a low-level relief, a single-A relief prospect over nothing, which is what you get from a waiver claim here. And part of the reason they did it is sort of, as Jim said, the roster fit is really important. One thing the Astros have talked about doing this year is getting more rest for Jose Abreu. And you're putting all your eggs into John Singleton, who's 33. And, so if they want more flexibility from that. The other thing that we've talked about several times in the show, and I've talked a number of times they could use, is a left-handed hitting corner outfielder. Because Chaz McCormick, Jake Myers, Mauricio Dubon, all their candidates for the outfield are all right-handed. If you had a left-hander, boy, it would make that work sort of a little bit better here. So he's someone I identified as a strong possibility the Astros sort of looking at. Again, is he a big deal? Probably not. This is a 26th man on the roster. He's got minor league options, so I suspect he will start the season. I think he'll start the season in Sugarland, that John Singleton will have the backup first baseman job, but it gives him more flexibility throughout the season. And again, had a good year in AAA last year, which doesn't guarantee much of anything, but I think is a worthwhile flyer at a very low cost.
Yeah, and as Astro Wolf Craig just pointed out in our comments section, he's got speed, and I know, we talked about Chaz, and before we get into that, Chaz, congratulations on your wedding. And I saw the photo, and it's proof that baseball is a great equalizer to everything, even for guys named Chaz. Well done, sir.
Yeah, are you out kicking your coverage when you're a major league outfielder? I mean, because he did if he is a plumber.
Yeah, especially anybody named Chaz, you're immediately like, whoop.
Well, typically people named Chaz peaked in high school. I think that's a statistical fact. I think even Brian can back that up with a lot of metrics.
There's got to be some numbers, right, Brian? Some
Yes,
analytics.
absolutely. And I will add this here. Apparently, she really, his wife really likes what Chaz looks like because initially in a bar she saw his twin brother and went up to him thinking it was Chaz. So apparently, hey, we all have types, and her types is, a McCormick.
It's a McCormick.
Yeah.
Back to Cabbage real quick, and I think, Brian, you brought up a really good point. As our fan base does tend to do on Twitter, there were overreactions, and all of a sudden this guy was going to be an all-star that the Angels, for some reason, DFA'd. I appreciate you kind of setting the expectation that this is a 25th, 26th man on your roster type that provides you some defensive flexibility. That's the upside. If he occasionally hits a home run, good. But I mean, the reality is he's not taking a lot of starts away from anybody on the Astros roster currently, unless he can stop striking out quite as much as he does.
Yeah. And kind of the last guy in the starting lineup is Jake Myers. So if Jake Myers is struggling and you want to send him down or do something with that, you can move Chaz to center, and this gives you more options in left field. And so, again, he could play there. He could play first base. Again, I don't expect, I don't expect 500 at-bats, but if we get 200 to 300 good at-bats out of a bench player, that can be quite useful.
Yeah, I think going back to what Brian said earlier, too, I think he's the same offensive performer as John Singleton with more tools. We're both waiting for either one of those guys to run into one, and then it'll go far. I do think, for as much as we kind of and I only tease John Singleton so much because his wife went after Andy on Twitter, and you don't mess with my guy. But you
she was just pointing out, she wasn't wrong. She was just pointing out facts. She said, yes,
he was still alive.
Right.
Yeah. But I do think he did walk more last year than I think people expected. So that was at least a plus. But I do think, like Brian said, this is the bottom of the roster thing. If we're counting on Cabbage to get 500 ABs and carry us through periods of time, then there's going to be bigger problems. But I think it's a nice pickup, and shows that Dana Brown is not asleep at the wheel, like some people want to think he is, because we didn't sign Neris.
Well, and speaking of guys we didn't sign, Phil Maton. I have never been able to pronounce his name.
Never, not once, Andy.
And literally every time you watch this show, we talk about him, it's a different pronunciation. It's only 5 letters, so I don't really know what that mental hang-up is for me. But Phil has.
Wait, hold on. I'm the guy who's born in a city that is 5. Its first name is 5 letters. Ryan, is spelled exactly the same as Maton, but pronounced correctly differently. Somehow I should be the guy getting it wrong.
Yeah.
You should. That's my.
It's been Maton.
Maton Rouge doesn't work at all.
My personal cross to bear is Phil Maton. Anyway, he's now the Rays cross to bear. He signed an undisclosed contract, or is near an undisclosed contract. No terms have been made available with the Tampa Bay Rays. And I'm looking at Sport Track right now, and they said he signed a 0-year contract with no money. So I think that's a good value for Tampa Bay.
I think so.
Moneyball has reached a new peak.
We didn't get the angst that you saw online, and maybe it's because it fell on a Saturday afternoon, but you didn't see quite the angst of Hector Neris signing with another team as you did with Phil going to Tampa Bay, potentially. Are the Astros fans growing up, or is this just, the reality of a early inning, mid-inning reliever moving on, and you're going to experience that a lot as a baseball fan. They come and they go.
I think the difference is the players. I think when you look, I think everybody, when they saw Neris's contract of, what was it, 1 year, $9 million, that would have been within grasp, and it would have been nice if, had the Astros made that deal, he took that deal. And I think you look at what he brings to a team is much bigger than what Maton does. Now, Andy, you and I have always kind of been on board for Maton despite his struggles. I think that's the other part of it too, is that every year the Astros fan base has felt differently about him. It's been a very schizophrenic relationship. And so I think those two things, I think really drove why there was angst about Neris and not angst about Phil.
Well, I'll get to Brian in just a second, because I know he has an opinion on Phil, but I think every reliever that has ever existed has somebody who hates them, and somebody who hates them blindly. It doesn't matter. I know
mine is Luke Gregerson.
Yeah. And Jim, for your dad, it was Dave Smith.
Yeah.
Right. It just didn't matter what he did. He was a bum. And for some people, that was Phil. Some people loved the fact that he had no facial expressions, and that was his entire personality. But he was a reliever who, in general, pitched well for the Astros. But he's ultimately pretty replaceable because there were plenty of times he didn't pitch well for the Astros. Brian, what's your take?
Yeah, two thoughts here. One, I think people you talk about Phil Maton's lack of expression. The complete opposite is Hector Neris, right? Who, enjoyed every single out he ever got, including the big ones he got in the playoffs. And then that's the second part of it, is Neris got big outs in the playoffs, particularly in 2022. And Phil Maton broke his hand because he gave up a single to his brother in the last game of the season.
They missed the playoffs. Yay.
He missed the playoffs, which is, it's not unforgivable, but as close to it as possible for
it's unforgivable because you won the World Series,
but you bring your World Series ring with you, particularly since you beat your brothers, since you beat Nick's team in the playoffs.
Well, he had to wear it on his left hand because he broke his right hand.
Absolutely. So anyway, and the other thing I think with Maton is we always expected Maton to really break out. He's a guy who the Astros targeted, that James Click in particular targeted, and gave up his starting center fielder for. It's more complicated than that. But to address a key need in 2021 in Phil Maton, who has some of the best spin in baseball, he's one of those guys who it feels like he should be better. Of course, he had this thing of, he literally throw the ball across the plate. He almost had too much spin. So I think I think there's an emotional component to it. And then I think there's shouldn't this guy have been better? We always thought he was going to have this extra level, and he never quite got there, though he was an effective reliever for the Astros.
Well, he's an interesting signing for the Rays for me, because he doesn't really fit the profile of what the Rays typically have in their bullpen. He doesn't throw appreciably hard. The spin rate is fantastic. But if you think about the Rays bullpens that the Astros have faced over the last several years, everybody coming out of that bullpen throws 100 plus. All of them have pretty decent command, and they can throw really hard for one inning. That's their kind of blueprint. And
the Rays also target guys who are different than the rest of their guys to give a different look.
Okay,
I think that's one of the factors that pushed him. He's very different than, say, Pete Fairbanks, who is the idea of what you're talking about here, Andy.
You won't know that he's mad that he has to sit in traffic getting to St. Pete when he's technically playing in Tampa Bay, because, again, no expression. I guess that's a thing that.
And look, if you have no emotions, you're a weirdo. And where do all the weirdos end up?
Florida.
Fair. Well,
maybe he's getting paid in gator teeth. Maybe that's why it's not really on Sports Track.
So that's possible. It's going to let it go, and I couldn't.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. The guy who gets paid in gator teeth is Phil Maton and not Colby Rasmus. Color me surprised.
Well, Colby Rasmus just doesn't. He's got these teeth issues, so maybe not. He's triggered.
You get paid in squirrel meat, I think.
Probably.
Well, he also is a big fan of Coca-Cola Light, which you can only get in Mexico because it has illegal sweeteners in it, but that's a whole different side piece. He may or may not be running a convoy up to the border. There's just been some difficulties there lately. If Phil's not going to be in our bullpen, and we have camp opening up in 9 days, we know who the big three in the bullpen are, and we're going to talk about the whole pitching staff in just a minute, but starting with the bullpen first, we know who the big three are going to be. We know that Brian Abreu, Ryan Presley, and Josh Hader in some order are going to be 6, 7, 8, or 7, 8, 9. But there's 5 to 6 other guys that are going to be in that bullpen for appreciable amounts of time. Who are those candidates at this point? Brian, I'll start with you.
All right. I think there are 3 people who will definitely make the opening day roster for various reasons. The first on that list is Rafael Montero, because it costs them too much money to get rid of him. And again, it's an even numbered year, and he's usually good in the even numbered year.
That's come to Brian for your statistic hardcore analytical take.
Okay. Well, I'll give them the more complicated one. Is relievers are volatile and they kind of go up and down. And I won't say he can't be worse than last year, but I hope that's true. Number 2 is JP France. And part of that is I don't think JP France will be in the bullpen. I think they will start with a 6-man rotation because they only have like one off day in the first 3 weeks of the season. I think they play like 16 of the first 17 days. And so I particularly think early in the season, they won't want to push their starters. Verlander will complain about that, and then Verlander will be notified that he's 40 years old and could use the extra day.
To which he'll reply with a photo of Kate Upton and be like, "Suck this, my never mind."
Yeah.
Well, we're having a whole Astros Wives special today, aren't we? Yeah.
Indeed,
I am at least. I don't know about you guys.
I'm gonna blame some injury on Daniela Correa here in a minute.
Yeah, totally.
Third, and this will be a little weird here, Brandon Bielak. And the reason is Brandon Bielak is out of options. And so I suspect that he has a leg up on the competition in the bullpen because the alternative to having him in the bullpen is having him on another team. And again, they particularly could use Brandon Bielak because, again, he's essentially right now their 7th starter if any of their starters go down. They're in a 5-man rotation. They need a next one. I think Brandon Bielak is most likely the next man up, particularly in the early part of the season. That may shift later. All right. So that's 3 spots, and there's essentially 2 more spots to go. Here are who I think the candidates are in order. Number 1, Bennett Sousa, who we saw at the end of last season and pitched really well and looked like the Astros had really done something with him. But again, he has options, could go down. Number 2, Dylan Coleman. He's the guy they acquired from the Royals. He's also an example of reliever volatility. He was really effective in 2022. And here's my comment on his 2023 season. He was really effective in 2022. All right. And then you got one more spot. So the candidates would be, I think, Seth Martinez, Ronel Blanco, and then they have acquired several other guys, including people in non-roster invitees, including people who pitched in the majors like Wander Suero, Taylor Scott, Braylon Marquez. These are not famous people. I don't expect anyone listening or watching to have heard of these people, but they acquired them because, hey, these guys could do something for us. Maybe we could get something sort of, out of them. And worth noting here, the Astros have 3 players, Lance McCullers, Luis Garcia, and Kendall Graveman, who are going to go on the 60-day IL when that opens up, basically on opening day. So they have room to add some people to the 40-man roster on opening day. So I will, since he's had the best major league career of any of these, I will say it'll be Wander Suero. It's the last guy in the bullpen.
I think Forrest Whitley makes the bullpen out of spring training, and I think that there is, almost it's if we have to figure out what this is or what this isn't. Forrest Whitley is like my high school girlfriend. Every time I think something's going to happen, it just doesn't. And she doesn't listen to the show.
Sorry,
so this is fine.
I also think Forrest Whitley's like my high school girlfriend because I'm not sure of their existence.
She's from Canada, and she
is Forrest from Canada, right? I had lots of high school girlfriends, my friend. I'm just saying. But no, I don't know. I feel like they want to go chips in, and I don't think if they weren't, they wouldn't be talking about Forrest so much. But I do think Forrest's day as a starter are probably over. So I do think they need to figure out what it is they have in him or don't have. I do think Sousa makes the bullpen, like you said. But But I think it's interesting because I think I don't look at this question, the questionable of these last 3 or 4 spots as problematic, because I think, Brian, you just mentioned a bunch of guys. I mentioned some guys. There's a lot of guys that they can figure out and they can find to fill these roles. And as you've said on our last week's episode, Brian, sometimes relievers just come out of nowhere for a season and have a good one. The Astros have plenty of opportunities to find that kind of diamond in the rough over the next, the first 6 weeks of spring, and especially knowing your top 3 are as elite as your top 3 are. It's a really nice problem to have, I think.
They have given themselves more options, and that seems to be a very clear strategy, not just in the, neither Jeff Lunau nor James Click really explored the non-roster invitees, minor league contract invitation to spring training options much. So this is a little different than what we've seen for the last 6-7 years. And, again, the cost, the risk of this are very low. Again, partly because, they've got the open spots on the 40-man roster once they can put guys on the 60-day IL.
So you're saying, much like my high school girlfriend, she's always looking for another option? Got it.
Well, this is not Jim's therapy show. That's at a different hour. And
we have
are
you sure about that?
Yeah.
I think there's also the acknowledgement that when you start doing the non-roster invitee route, that the Astros do have a contractual obligation to field a team in Sugarland this year, and there's not exactly a lot of top of the rotation kind of guys sitting in our minor league system right now that are ready to be in AAA. So some of these are stopgaps, and I think I enjoy the conversation. I'm the one who led the conversation, or brought up the topic. But I also think that most fans should realize that the guys that we break camp with as a bullpen are probably not the guys that we end up with. We've seen even as recently as 21, where the front office basically rebuilt the bullpen on the fly in the middle of the season. I don't think that's what we're doing this year, but I think there's going to be several ups and downs. Vegas would probably tell you betting on Forrest Whitley isn't a great proposition to last an entire season, even if he does break camp or make the major league roster at some point. So somebody's got to be the next guy up. And if it's Ronel Blanco or it's one of these guys that Mr. Scott, who Astros have had a good track record of bringing guys up named Scott who didn't do well in prior stops. So, who knows? Just a little sandpaper and luck, and you've got an all-star pitcher.
Is a nail file coming with him?
Hey, it's a big month for Taylor S's. So
it is a big month.
Taylor Scott.
I mean, between Taylor Scott and Taylor Swift, they've sold billions of albums.
Billions of albums, and apparently are about to change an election. I've heard. I don't know. I've heard from everybody but her that she's going to change the election.
We're all very political. So we talked about the bullpen. Brian, you brought up the topic of 6-man rotation. Just a little quick math here for those who haven't really looked at the schedule that's been out for a while. The Astros play 63 games in the first 68 days of the season, and that sounds like 5 days off until you realize they're all kind of clustered together in the span of a week. There's a stretch of 13 games in a row with no day off, 16 games in a row with no day off, and 13 more games. That's a lot of games at the beginning of the season. You have Justin Verlander, who is arguably going to be your best pitcher if you don't count Fromber, and I don't know what we're counting on Fromber for right now. So let's say Verlander gets I'm the most consistent guy that you've got, if not best. I don't know at 40 years old that he should be throwing every 5 days. I know, to Brian's point, he has a different opinion on that. But how is the rotation going to shake out for these first 2-3 months of the season before reinforcements or trades, if necessary, happen? Let's start with Jim.
Well, I do think I'm going to let Brian answer the numbers part of the question. I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and look at the schedule. It looks pretty daunting, but it means it's lightened up at the end of the season for there to be an end of the season push. I do think 6-man rotation is what you're going to see, and I think Verlander. I think much is said about his desire to pitch every 5th day, but I also think he's pretty aware of what his body can and can't do. And I think if you're talking about him being more effective at the end of September, he'll understand that a 6-man rotation is going to benefit him more than anybody else, really. So, I think, but I do think Brian's right. I think that's what we're heading for as far as the 6-man rotation goes.
Yeah, and just another issue that we saw last year, right, is that Hunter Brown and J.P. France in particular were pushed beyond what they had done before. And they both, particularly Hunter Brown, had real struggles in the second half of the season. There's some batted ball luck there with Hunter Brown, but there's a reason to expect he's a better pitcher than we saw last year, just sort of with luck evening out. But I think it's a broad thing across the roster. The other thing to note is relying on Luis Garcia and Lance McCullers to come in and pitch well after their surgeries is, you don't really know what you're going to get out of that.
Or relying Lance to come back at all.
Yeah, right. And so,
I mean, let's be honest.
Hey, and look, we're going to spend 3 to 4 months. I will say this many times on this show. Lance McCullers will give interviews with the media. He'll be optimistic about his rehab, and I will come on here and say, I don't want to hear any of that. Just tell me when he makes his rehab starts.
Yeah, I mean, because we did this last season.
And the season before.
Mm-hmm. Well, he has said he said August, and then it started to become July. And this past weekend, or I guess past week, he hosted the Houston Sports Awards, which is a thing now. And
when are we getting nominated for one of those?
I don't know, but Lance Berkman is part of the Houston Hall of Fame. So congratulations to Lance. But he hosted, and I think that's probably his best future career. If I'm talking about Lance McCullers Jr., is being behind a mic talking about things, because he's really, really good at it. He also started talking about maybe I could be back in June. And we're starting to see his competitive fire being what it is, all that fun athlete-y stuff creeping up. If we see him by August, I will be amazed. And not because I don't think he has the desire, not because I don't think he works hard, because the track record says his arm has a lot of problems.
What's the old Bill Parcells quote? At some point, you are what your record says you are.
Yeah. I have a lot more faith that Luis Garcia is going to come back, and that's based on nothing other than he hasn't been hurt before.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. That's why I brought up trades, because I think regardless of how many starting pitchers the Astros happen to have on their 40-man roster right now, I could see it absolutely a need mid-season where they need a starter who can eat some innings. I would have liked to see the Astros take a flyer on Jordan Montgomery, and not really a flyer, but tried to sign him. He's still out there. It's not a thing that's going to happen. Nobody should get their hopes up about that. That made more sense to me than a Blake Snell type signing. But you've got 6 or 7 guys who are technically starters. I think Hunter Brown's a guy that you could look at in the bullpen as well. He's on the major league roster, barring a complete meltdown in the spring. I don't know what his role is yet. I think, Brian, and I think you've said this before, his secondary numbers were a lot better than his season looked at the end of the season. He also very clearly wore down, because about through the middle of July, he was really, really good. And then things started to fall apart, where he had more bad luck, more balls getting through, a lot more home runs given up. So he's kind of a key for me. You've got Verlander, you've got Framber, you've got Javier. You don't know what you're really getting from 2 of those guys. I would recommend going out and reading Brian's Substack from this weekend about Christian Javier and his missing slider and the hope that it comes back. I think Javier had some real good things happen for him in the playoffs. I think he proved that even when a team's going to stack a bunch of left-handers against him, he's going to be able to pitch. He's got to do that consistently, part of which justify the amount of payroll we're spending on him, but part of which we need him to be a 2-3 type guy in our rotation. Framber's the big question mark for me when you're talking rotation right now, because the guy before the All-Star break was fantastic. The guy after the All-Star break was fungible. And that's saying a lot in today's baseball, where starters only need to really go 5 innings, maybe.
Especially this team, he's going to need to be able to go 6 and turn it over. Just get us.
But 6 good innings, not 6. I gave up 4. And
no, I know. And I mean, look, like I love that. Brian, you diagnosed Christian. Next time, can you please diagnose Fromber and figure out exactly what happened to him this past season? Because I don't. Do you have to have a psychology degree to do it, Brian? Is that the issue?
Certainly, that's part of it, and my PhD is elsewhere. I think sort of the biggest issue with rotation is it's.
Everybody take a drink. Brian mentioned his PhD. Just kidding, Brian. I'm just teasing. Sorry. I don't think you've actually ever mentioned your PhD on this show before, ever. I just thought that would be funny. Apparently, I'm the only one.
I've wanted to call him Dr. Arbor for a while, and we just haven't done it.
It is, important to be called doctor only in certain circumstances, and that includes not, in any medical emergency where I can offer, a lecture on the functioning of Congress.
Actually, we might need that more than anything now, but
definitely different podcast.
Definitely different podcast.
Definitely.
Yeah. The sort of biggest to me issue with the rotation is it's not clear to me who the number 3 starter is in the playoffs. And so one reason I was sort of exploring Christian Javier over the weekend is, can he get back to doing that? Because when he was that in 2022, he pitched the most important game in 2022, the one series they were down in, and, no hits is pretty good, right? And so, Hunter Brown's another possibility for that. Again, he would need to, one, have some of his, fatigue issues and his batted ball luck issues regress. So that's likely, but also improve some. And again, he's a young guy. So again, that's certainly sort of possible. And then that's the other thing they can think about is a trade at the deadline. And again, we're a long way off from that, other than, again, to go back to one thing we talked about before, one reason they didn't sign another bullpen arm, I think, is that they're at the max of their budget for right now. And
Crane's cheap.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
Cheap. He's the bird that flew over Kmart, man. Cheap.
They all have budgets. Probably went over it for Hader. But again, part of that is we're going to save some money. We're going to save some money, in the theoretical budget for what we acquire at the trade deadline.
Right.
Starting pitcher maybe at the top of the list. Obviously, depends on what happens over the next 4 months.
I do think that's it, though, right? Like, I don't think, everybody wants to be a hater about cheap Jim Crane's inability to spend. Cheap. But he did sign Hader, so there you go. Yeah, I do agree. I think you're right, Brian. I think they're going to ride with what they have now and then start looking at the trade deadline, because even though with the expanded playoffs, there's still going to be teams that are going to clearly be selling at the deadline.
All right, we're going to close the show today. We had one more topic to talk about as we're entering that time before spring training. We're looking at our roster and the non-roster invitees and the guys who are being brought up to participate in Major League Camp for the first time, and it's an exciting time for baseball players, for baseball fans. February is the worst sports month by far, because outside of the Super Bowl, if your team happens to be in it or you're a Taylor Swift fan, up until March, there's not a lot going on. College basketball is fairly boring. Jim doesn't like college basketball anyway, but college basketball in and of itself, nobody cares until March. You don't have baseball really, unless you're really into the single A guy who's getting to face against Jose Altuve for one time later this month. And the NBA is, I don't even know that's a sport anymore. So we look forward to spring training. We look forward to all the arguments about it. And there's always one guy who has a camp that turns heads. People talk about, they want. Last year, for a lot of Astros fans, it was Justin Durden, and he never made the roster, and it proved to be a pretty hot month and a half, and then kind of went away because it didn't translate to AAA numbers. But who's the guy for you this year that would be significant for the Astros that needs to have a good camp, that needs to have a strong showing in camp? And we'll start with Brian on this one.
Yeah, I'll offer two names because they're sort of in the same pile here. One is Sean Dubin, and the other is Spencer Arrighetti. And again, the reason that's a big deal is because they're thin on sort of rotation arms, and of course, in part because they've got two of them on the who are going to be on the injured list, and you need more depth there both for this year and on into the future. So Dubin's on the 40-man roster. Arrigetti's the best prospect among the pitchers, and so they're two people I'm going to look at in particular and hope have a good spring training because, again, hey, we may be calling on them for a start in the middle of April, even though it's sure seems early for that.
I'm going to go with Forrest Whitley, and part of it is because I also think that fairly or unfairly, there's also now been 6 years of rolling the dice that he was going to do something, and opportunities that we didn't take using him in a trade piece or whatever didn't happen. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on his spot in the roster. And so I really think that him having a good spring and proving that he can come in and at least be like a 6th inning guy in the bullpen, I think is going to be really important to the Astros this year.
I was going to say Whitley, and I guess we should have done some pre-work on this show, but why would
no,
we
I like
doing that?
We're by the seat of our pants, brother. You know what I mean?
I was going to say Whitley mainly because I think the Astros need solid bullpen options, but I can't help but root for the guy because some of his delay has been of his own doing, and
Sure.
I think he would be the first person to admit that. But a lot of his delay has just been bad luck injury after bad luck injury, and maybe his body's not made to be a major leaguer. But you can't help root for the guy who was a number one prospect and was absolutely on Jeff Lunau's untradeable list for a very long time.
With good reason, based on how he's performing initially.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Up until AAA, he was lights out.
Yeah. So it's if I'm picking somebody else, though, it's going to be one of Trey Cabbage and John Singleton, because the Astros need somebody, and they're both kind of the same thing. I need you to prove that you can play baseball without striking out a lot. Cabbage makes the most sense for this roster, and he's a 25th, 26th guy, but he answers a lot of questions for things the Astros need. He's a left-handed hit outfielder. He's pretty good defensively on the corners. He can play first base respectably, maybe respectfully too. Maybe he's very nice to the first base umpire. I don't know. Guy. But the Astros have to find an answer for when Jose Abreu lost my train of thought. Jose Abreu is struggling, as he's probably going to do at some point during the year. And even if he's not, he's got to rest. He's not a 6 game a week guy anymore. And regardless of how much he wants to be, that's not smart baseball. So somebody who is capable of being in there, spotting him from time to time, and giving him a break, but also not having a huge drop off offensively or defensively from the position. So I don't really care if it's Cabbage or Singleton, but one of them has to figure out how to be a capable major league hitter. I'd love to see them do that in camp. Now, as camp goes, what they do in the first couple weeks of camp only buys them some more time for the next few weeks of camp.
Right.
What you'd love to see is one of them really hitting well that second and third and fourth and fifth week of camp, where you're not facing single A guys just getting work, or you're not facing a guy who's doing nothing but throwing sliders for his entire appearance because that's what he's working on that day. But that, to me, if one of those guys becomes solid, that really solidifies this roster, gives you a capable left-handed bat off the bench, and strengthens an area where we were pretty weak last year, being bench play.
Totally agree. Before we go, I know you're about to wrap the show up. I do have to do a shameless plug. We are trying to fund our part of our finishing fees for Ballpark Nation. I think most people that are listening know that we are taking the show to a much wider audience, which means things like E&O insurance and stuff like that. So we do have an Indiegogo going. We're almost to our first 1,000. So if you consider $25 here and there, it goes a long way. Please and thank you.
I've got some Bazooka Joe for good karma.
I'm not even quite sure what that means anymore, man.
I was hoping you'd get the Empire Records reference, but that's fine.
A little early in the morning for that, but you know me.
You'll slap yourself later for not getting it.
I will.
All right. That kind of wraps us up for February 5th. Next week, we will come back, and Jim will have a whole new topic for us to talk about, but I'm going to assume it has to do with the rest of the roster, since we'll be scant days away from pitchers and catchers reporting. For Jim, for Brian, I'm Andy Tom Chesson. This is Go Astros. Go Stros.
Go Stros.
Go Stros.